Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
I believe that the born-again phenomenon, if it becomes just an isolated event, divorced from a past and divorced from a future, is really going to cause us a lot of difficulties. And I think that we end up really misreading the real nature of the Christian life when we get zeroed in on one event and don't think of it as a lifelong process. In other words, I'm saying that the ordinary Christian who hasn't gone through that has something important to contribute to our general understanding of piety.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Father Ed Schleter, pastor of St. Francis de Sales Parish in Toledo. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of the born-again movement. Here's Father Bacik.
Ed, thank you for coming on the program and talking with me. I know you as one of our fine pastors in the city of Toledo and a person who has been open and sensitive to what we commonly call the modern charismatic movement. And it's that charismatic movement that I would like to talk about. I'm not so sure that word is totally familiar to everyone. It really refers to a movement that began in the middle 60s at Duquesne University and has spread around the world to where over 1 million people are involved in it. It is a Christian movement. It's found in the mainline churches, both Catholic and Protestant, and centers a lot on the gifts of the Holy Spirit. They do speaking in tongues, and they talk a lot about healing people. They believe that the Spirit is being poured out in our own times, much as it was at the beginning, at the time of Pentecost, and that as you find in Paul's Corinthian community, where people had various charisms or special gifts for the building up of the community, that's happening as well today. Our charismatic friends do a lot of reading of the Bible when they gather to celebrate the Eucharist, and I've had Mass with them on occasion. It's usually a long service. They don't mind long sermons, and they like dialogue homilies where everyone gets a chance to say something. They like the spontaneous parts of the Mass where there's opportunity to pray for various intentions. I've been at charismatic Masses where speaking in tongues is part of the Mass. So we get a high emotionalism in this movement. And it has links with in our Catholic community, with the official hierarchy. Cardinal Soenens of Belgium is often thought of as the leader of the movement. And bishops around the world are in touch with it. Bishop Al Ottenweller, I know, has been at various charismatic gatherings and has celebrated the Eucharist with them. A lot of times the charismatics want more involvement from the leadership in the church. So we're talking about a very significant religious phenomenon in the modern world that has a lot of correlation with the general religious revival in our culture. There's a lot of similarities between the charismatic movement as found in the mainline churches and the evangelical movement, as we know it in the Pentecostal churches and in the freer churches. And one element that I think maybe binds a lot of the movement together is this phenomenon of being born again, of being baptized in the power of the Spirit. And so we have national polls that ask people, are you a born-again Christian? And we get high numbers saying that. I forget the exact figures, but some will claim as many as 50 million people in the country claiming to be born-again Christians. We've had people in the White House. President Carter was an avowed born-again Christian. And so that really has become a well-known phenomenon. I find myself getting a lot of questions about it. People come up and ask, well, what does that mean to be born again, and what's that all about, and do we need it, and so on. And I imagine in your own pastoral work, Ed, you get a lot of calls upon that kind of information as well.
I think, Jim, that probably a little bit of my history is interesting on this because when I first became a priest, I was in a parish where I thought it was really neat that actually Catholic laymen would really get up and publicly say the name Jesus out loud. I thought that was really a neat breakthrough. And that was Cursillo. And then the thing that seemed to happen was this Pentecostal and later charismatic renewal came in, and people not only were saying that, but they felt this was sort of another step to get enthused and to meet together and pray. I came to Toledo, and I ended up in a parish where Stan and Pat Pribilek had, a few years earlier, around 1970, started the charismatic renewal for Catholics, as far as I know, in the city of Toledo, started in their home, in their basement. And so I've kind of bumped into the people along the way, in addition to my own brother. The born-again or personal commitment that I'm seeing in that for adults would seem to me to be important. And I don't know, you're more of a historian, theologian than I am. I'm wondering if that isn't part of the tradition of the Baptists, to have adult baptism was out of a sense, too, that you needed to have some adult experience in reaction to our more long processed system of delivering Catholics. Baptize them as infants and then process them through sacraments, so there's no one point in their life where they really make a major decision about Christ. And in reaction to that, I guess, I don't know where the Baptists were, but I'm thinking maybe that's where we're at now. We're saying, nowhere along the line did I ever say that Jesus was really somebody to me.
Okay, I think that I would link that up, I think, with that type of Baptist tradition where it was expected that there would be a decisive point in your conscious life where one committed oneself once and for all to Jesus, and that there was no going back on it, and that it was to be a decisive kind of event in one's life. I think that there is a correlation between that and what is going on in the modern evangelical and charismatic renewal. It seems as though that's what people are looking for, some event that will turn life around for them.
Is that Pauline, like get knocked off their horse?
A clear conversion experience. Yeah, I think it is. I think that Paul is often taken as the model in this kind of conversion experience, that there's a sharp event. One goes from a life of persecution or persecuting the Christians to now being an advocate and a missionary and a zealot for the movement. Yeah, I think it has that kind of character to it. I think it is good to link the baptism of the Spirit, or the second baptism as some people call it, or this born-again experience, with this notion of conversion. The classic study by William James on this is found in the Varieties of Religious Experience, points out that there really are two types of conversion experience. One is gradual, progressive throughout life, and the other one is sort of sudden, or appears to be sudden. And he distinguishes two different types of piety based on that. But one interesting thing he says is that this sudden conversion is often prepared for in some way. That often there is something going on in the unconscious life. There is a previous history that sort of is propelling one in that direction, and it becomes visible or striking at a particular day or time. And I think that might be interesting to keep in mind in the life of an individual. You contrasted, and I think very well, this life of continual growth in the faith with this striking conversion. And there's a way in which they are different. But I'm not so sure they're as different as the language seems to portray.
The language is, I guess, the question that I'm wondering about. Yeah, born again, and you even get that question, maybe even stopped on the street. Are you born again?
Yeah, people are sort of turned off by that. But I think where the two come together is this, that the person who's living a gradual life of growth is going to find it punctuated by bigger moments. There's certain times when there's a catalyst for growth, where there's a new experience that forces a new way of thinking. The person might not advert to it or mark the day on the calendar, and it might not be striking. But there is a rhythm to it, punctuated by more important or significant times. On the other hand, the born-again phenomenon and the striking conversion, I think, have an element in them of gradual preparation. I don't think it occurs simply in a vacuum. Very often people are attracted to the movement. They begin to pray with somebody else. They find in their own heart a searching going on. They find themselves looking. They're dissatisfied with a former life. Maybe they're coming out of the drug scene, or they haven't been very committed to their religious tradition. And they begin to reflect on that. And so I think that moment often has a bit of preparation in it. If you look back at St. Paul, maybe that moment when he says he held the coats for the people throwing the stones at Stephen, maybe that was working on his unconscious. Maybe he felt there was something wrong with that. God works through ordinary causes, and perhaps there is a prehistory even to Paul's striking conversion. I'm not saying I know that's the truth, but I'm saying that could be involved in it.
I've often thought of Peter and Paul in contrast in that light, I guess, because I have never had the horse event. I've never yet. Maybe I still will.
Have the striking conversion.
The striking conversion. But I think of Peter. Okay, Lord, I'm ready. Yeah. And he backs off again. And then a little later, again. I wonder even after, how many times after Pentecost he was still being converted.
Yeah, falls and jumps back again. I remember talking to a man who was converted to the charismatic renewal and talked to me about that having happened once and for all. He thought, this is it. Now my life is shaped up and I'm going to be a good Christian and a good family man and it's all going to be great. And he found out it wasn't like that. And he told me the major thing I learned is that you're not converted once and for all, but that conversion is a lifelong process. And I think that well articulated my own sense of it. One of the problems with the born-again thing is that somehow the conviction that now it might be easy, or now that it's just all comes naturally, in a sense, out of the workings of the Spirit, but that it's just part of me and it flows out with no particular systematic effort or intelligent approach to it and so on, and that one can just be spontaneous about it. And I'm not sure that's true. Some of our spontaneous reactions prove to be helpful and constructive and spread the kingdom, but sometimes it needs to be tempered. Sometimes we need a prudence about the way we spread the message of Christianity, and sometimes we need to rationally control our impulses. So I believe that the born-again phenomenon, if it becomes just an isolated event, divorced from a past and divorced from a future, is really going to cause us a lot of difficulties. And I think that we end up really misreading the real nature of the Christian life when we get zeroed in on one event and don't think of it as a lifelong process. In other words, I'm saying that the ordinary Christian who hasn't gone through that has something important to contribute to our general understanding of piety. I remember talking to one woman who said she was at a meeting, evidently, of an evangelical type community, and the people there began to pray for one member in the group that wasn't yet converted and wanted her to come forward, and she didn't really know what was happening. And as time went on, one girl came over to her and said, well, you know, don't you know they're praying for you? You're supposed to go up there. You have to be born again. And she proceeded to tell the young lady that she had been born again as an infant and had been working at developing that Christian life ever since and didn't need to go forward to be born again. In other words, she had a confidence in her own religious experience, which I found to be a healthy sign myself. I think it was a good answer in a way. It said that she understood that gradual growth is a legitimate way to move towards God, just as legitimate as this striking born-again experience.
In fact, the born-again may have the disadvantage that you've only had one high point of your religious experience and it's past.
Could be, although
I've heard people refer to it that way. Oh. And when they tell their story, they always tell you the story of, and it gets bad because now they're telling the story that happened 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm sad for them because they've then locked into it as something that God did. When I was that age, God really moved in me, and I get the impression like God moved more in them then than He's moving in them now.
That's an interesting point. You do find the other phenomenon, though, that people will have that born-again experience and now say that they find God in everything, or that God continues to speak. That's the neat
one. I like that, because then their eyes are really open and they're growing. And
then it has a much more positive ring to it.
And going to the charismatic renewal in general, maybe that's one of the neat things about it. People who, because they're sensitive to the Holy Spirit, do see God in everything, and every decision they're trying to be in touch with His will, and they really are leading a new life, and in that sense they've been born again, not as a one-shot event.
When people are talking born again, Ed, you've heard people describe that kind of event and what it would be like. I think that I've heard some people say it was occurred in a group setting where they would be around and they're with other born-again Christians and they would begin to pray for them. I remember one girl telling me how they all put their hands on her head and they were praying for her that she would receive the gifts of the Spirit and would be turned to the Lord and everything. And she told me that she felt like she was levitating, like she felt like she was just going to rise right up. And she felt a tremendous sense of exhilaration in her life and liberation, and she spoke of it as a letting go which is an interesting image. She let go, and her language would be, I let go of my own selfishness and my own ego, my own way of doing things, and handed my life over to the Lord. And she described it in very positive terms and was grateful to the group for giving her this blessing, and she felt liberated and like a new person. And I think this is very often what some of the elements, at least, that are in the born-again experience. Liberation, exhilaration, a sense of beginning over, turning one's life around, handing one's life over to the Lord, letting go of one's selfishness, and sort of being on track then in tune with the will of God. Now, I suppose this occurs in isolated cases, too, outside of group experiences. I don't know, have you talked to people about it?
I've talked to people who have gone to their room to pray and started speaking in tongues and didn't know what they were doing. Claimed they had never heard of such a thing, and then went to a group and started telling somebody what happened to them. They said, "Oh, don't you know what that is? That's called speaking in tongues," and they were scared of it.
And that they would think of that then again as their born again experience,
or their baptism in the Holy Spirit.
No.
I think probably the letting go catches it for me a little better than being free to become somebody, because it seems to be basically a passive experience. The Holy Spirit taking a hold of them, maybe using the image not so much the Holy Spirit is in me, but more I am now in the Holy Spirit. I have the image of almost like being surrounded by an electric shock, and the waves are coming out of the person, and they speak in terms of maybe tingling sensations in the body. And some even associate it with almost like losing their consciousness, which may be associated with the levitation sense, that they're not present to their physical body so much anymore. They come out of it somehow.
Well, that's interesting. So a physical phenomenon.
Physical feelings
with it,
connected with it, and
strong emotions, for sure.
Strong emotions and a definite sense of the Holy Spirit being in control. Rather than me now having a new power for me, He sort of has me.
You know, I think there is a general phenomenon in life that this relates to, and that is the letting go experience. If you take any kind of situation that you cannot control anymore, say there's a relationship and it's going bad, and if you tried to reach out to the other person, you would just make them madder and it would bother them more and so on. And you at some point are able to let go of that. By that I mean say, okay, there's nothing I can do about it. I just have to be peaceful about it and let go and hand it over to God. I can't pick up the phone and call him or go over and see him or try to make it better. And there often is a sense of peace that accompanies that. I think the letting go experience in life is rather common. And the fact that it liberates people, I think, really is true. Now, if it became a total passivity or a quietism, or where one said, well, I'm not going to think for myself, and I'm not going to try to do anything myself or plan or work at it, then I think we would have a big mistake. But when we're dealing with inevitability and we're able to let go, I think it is a freeing experience. I think it is the working of God's Spirit, whether it's in any kind of ordinary personal relationship or whether it's concerned with explicit Christian things like this born-again experience.
I would like to just testify that I can identify with. I've spoken a lot about what I've seen in others. For me, that has been it's really kind of interesting, because I would like to get to God by working at it. But I found some of my deepest moments have been the times I've just sat there and said, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. I can't get there.
And then found a peace.
And then all wants God. You know, I didn't say A, B, and then C. I just went A, B, and then what C happened to me.
Right. I think that's where many people experience the genuine workings of the Spirit, although I believe that many people would not denominate it that way. They wouldn't have a language to put on it. Again, you're back to that problem of language, as you suggested before, that I'm afraid very often the charismatic language turns people off. And if they could find another way of speaking about this phenomenon, we probably would end up being better off, or they could at least communicate the depth of their experience in a better way and would make people more receptive to the deep message they have.
I've heard this fight. Someone says, have you been saved? And another one says, no, yeah, you may have been saved, but have you been born again? And then somebody says, have you been born again? They said, oh, you maybe have been born again, but have you been baptized in the Holy Spirit? No. So
it always gets more exclusive, and then that next person will say, yeah, but do you speak in tongues or not? This is the danger.
Or are you on the way?
Yeah. Or this is the danger, as I see it, as I look at the negative critique of the charismatic renewal, is towards exclusivism. That is, towards some way saying that this brand of piety is the only brand that exists, that if you don't measure up to these standards, there's something wrong. And the standards seem to get stricter, as you well suggest by your language there. So sometimes born again isn't even enough. There seems to be something more. Ed, there's a theology involved in this that I think it's important to get a hold of here. And that is our general understanding of the workings of the Spirit in the world as a whole. I think it's an authentic part of Christian understanding that God has sent His Spirit in the whole of our world, that the Spirit has entered into the heart of every person who's opened their heart at all.
You mean even in areas of the world that have never had many Christian churches?
Yeah, that's right, precisely. People have never heard of Jesus Christ, never had the gospel preached to them. Surely we cannot think that God has abandoned those people.
He doesn't wait to send His Spirit until the Word has been preached.
I think that's true. I think the Spirit is present in our world always and everywhere. We swim and move in that Spirit. God wills the salvation of all people, as we read in 1 Timothy 2:4.
You realize a lot of people find what you're saying now very heavy.
That's right. A lot of people disagree with that. Fundamental distinction between a contemporary, more progressive, open kind of theology and a more doctrinaire understanding of the Scriptures, which leads to exclusivism, I think. I do see two divergent theologies there. And that more negative theology does have important names connected with it, and I don't want to disparage it entirely. But my own theological bent is to think that God is present in the world, send His Spirit upon everybody who opens their heart, and that Spirit then causes progressive growth in us. So that as a person is more responsive in their life, we should grow in our ability to follow our conscience, to grow to maturity, to be more in tune with the will of God, whatever language fits your given situation. And for us, in our Catholic community, in the mainline churches, we say that baptism is an important part of that. That yes, we baptize infants, but not as a once-for-all event, but that root power is given to be a member of the church and to have the Spirit and to grow in the power of that Spirit. So that baptism is really a call or a vocation to growth in the Christian life, which is never completed. And what is called for at any point in one's life is to make the kind of commitment that one is capable of according to maturity and circumstances at that time. So we have a beautiful rite in our Catholic tradition of the Easter Vigil, where we renew our baptismal vows, and where all the adults present who had nothing to say about it when they were a little baby can now affirm as an adult those same vows, the belief in the fundamental creed and the disavowal of evil that was done for us when we were youngsters. So our sense is that baptism is a once-for-all event. It occurs, and the root power of the Spirit is given to us. It symbolizes our entry into the community of believers in the power of the Lord and His Spirit, and calls upon us to make continual growth. So that really is a legitimate kind of piety, and it's a legitimate way of thinking of gradual growth. Now, if somebody in that process has a very striking experience, fine. They can call it that, and they want to call it a born-again experience, fine. And conversion is a tremendous thing, and when people experience freedom and liberation, more power to them. That frees them to witness to the truth of the gospel, and we should rejoice in those kinds of conversions.
Experientially, that may be for them at a conscious level the first time in their life it's really come together. So they could relate to that as being, now I really know who God is, what love is, what the Holy Spirit is. But we would be saying He wasn't absent before that.
That's right, as though the Spirit was not at work at all before. That's well put, yeah. And I think that would give us a positive way of talking about that experience as a high point in a whole process of the working out of the Spirit that God has put within us. And then we would have, I think, a better framework for understanding this whole born-again phenomenon that we're talking about.
I like the idea that we're children of God from the moment we're created, even before baptism.
I do too.
And then if God's Spirit was unleashed by Jesus Christ, He's unleashed on the whole world, even before baptism.
Yes, agreed.
And so that we are operating in a Spirit-filled world, and that ours is to open up to that, and these experiences and these sacraments are ways to open up that event for us.
Truly, yeah. I think that's well put, a simplified version of that important contemporary theology, and one that we need to hold on to. Always a proper theological understanding is what saves us, I think, from a lot of mistakes in the Christian life. So, Ed, we've been talking about this born-again phenomenon. There's a lot of people in our world today who call themselves born-again Christians. I think probably even have born-again Muslims these days. That's one way of understanding what's going on in our world. We shouldn't really get into that, but a lot of people around who think there's been something decisive that has happened in their life that's changed their existence. And a good way of thinking of it is as a conversion experience. And conversion experiences often have some presuppositions to them, a prehistory. And I would like to think that that prehistory as well is the prompting of the Spirit, and that one need not feel defensive about the fact that one has never had a striking experience or been born again, or that one doesn't enjoy the charismatic expression of piety, or that one's never spoken in tongues. I think that is not essential to growth in the Christian life. We like to say that baptism symbolizes for us our entry into the church. It's the visibility of the grace of the Spirit that is at work in our lives, and that what it calls upon us to do is to live it out in gradual growth and to periodically ratify that, to say it in words. And I think our chance to renew our baptismal vows is a real important element in that, and we could give that really a lot of meaning. At the same time, I want to remain positive to this born-again experience, because I think it's a vital thing for people's lives. I've seen many people do much better and be improved tremendously and really make a good witness to the truth, and I think that should be celebrated, and we should be happy that more and more of that is happening. And we ought to all be looking for the conversion moments in our own lives when we could do better and make a purer and stronger response to the God who's always calling us.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Father Ed Schlueter, pastor of St. Francis de Sales Parish in Toledo. The topic